At the Oak Ridge Animal Rescue Center, something strange was happening. A massive brown bear, rescued from captivity and usually calm and solitary, had started doing something no one expected. He would quietly break into the puppy's shelter at night, not to harm them, but to gently wrap his massive paws around the crying puppies and rock them softly, like a mother would. At first, staff thought it was just a quirk. Maybe the bear liked warmth or the sound of whining. But it kept happening night after night. Every time a puppy cried, the bear would arrive like a silent guardian and hold them until they calmed down. It was tender, mysterious, and deeply unsettling. Concerned, the vets ran tests, watched footage, and finally uncovered truth so heartbreaking, so deeply human, that it left everyone who heard it in tears. The Oak Ridge Animal Rescue Center wasn't used to surprises. Days were long but predictable, feedings, cleanings, vet checks, and paperwork. But ever since they'd taken the massive brown bear named Amos, things had changed. Amos was a retired performance bear, rescued after years of neglect in a traveling circus. He had arrived quiet and subdued, almost unnaturally so. At first, the staff worried he might be aggressive or untrainable, but instead, he spent most of his time curled in a corner of his enclosure, staring out silently. Despite his intimidating size, nearly 700 pounds of muscle and fur, Amos had never so much as growled. Volunteers called him the silent monk. He didn't play, didn't pace like stressed rescues usually did. He just watched. But then the night disturbances began. It started subtly. Each morning, staff would find the puppy room door ajar, even though it had been securely locked the evening before. At first, they blamed faulty latches or overworked volunteers. But what they couldn't explain were the cameras. The puppy room had surveillance footage for safety. When reviewed, staff were shocked. At exactly 2:13 a.m., Amos had quietly pushed open the outer gate of his enclosure using his shoulder, then made his way, without panic or aggression, into the adjacent building. He nudged open the puppy room door and entered slowly. Inside, the crying puppies, who had been howling moments earlier, suddenly stopped. Amos laid down beside them, placed his enormous body near their crate, and reached a gentle paw toward the ones closest to him. Then, in an action no one could explain, he wrapped one foreleg around the crate and stayed like that, still, calm, comforting, until morning. Some of the staff were alarmed. He's huge. What if one day he changes his mind? But others were simply in awe. Look at how they respond to him, said Lila, the assistant vet. They calm down, completely, like they feel safe. They began to leave the door open, intentionally. Every night, Amos made his visit. It wasn't long before it became routine. Any time a litter of puppies came in, usually scared, crying for their mothers, Amos would show up within minutes and offer what no medicine or heat lamp could: presence. A warm, protective presence. The mystery was growing. Why did he do this? What drew him to their cries? And how did a bear, a creature once used for harsh entertainment, learn to be so soft, so caring? The staff couldn't explain it. But one day, when a new group of abandoned pups arrived and Amos rushed faster than ever to them, the head vet, Dr. Karen Holt, made a decision. It's time to run full tests, she said quietly. On Amos, on everything. What they would discover was something no one was prepared for. Dr. Karen Holt had been a veterinarian for nearly 2 decades, but nothing in her career, no case, no animal behavior, no test result, had ever felt quite like this. She'd seen dogs mourn lost owners, and cats refuse to eat after being rehomed. But a bear who soothed puppies as if he were born to do it, it wasn't normal. It was human. She scheduled a complete behavioral evaluation, along with neurological scans and blood work. Amos was calm through every step. No sedation needed. He responded to gentle voice commands and remained perfectly still when they touched his paws or lifted his eyelids. When they placed him under a scanner, he didn't resist. It was like he understood something was happening. But it wasn't until Karen reviewed his circus records that she felt a chill settle in her chest. There, buried in the transport logs, was a mention of second bear, female, black-coated, used for maternal routines. Karen dug further. The circus had once used a pair of bears in an act where one played the father and the other the mother in a bizarre, costumed bear family routine. Her heart sank. The female, according to later notes, had died during a winter performance years ago from untreated pneumonia. The bears had been kept in close quarters, often forced to interact affectionately on cue. The only love Amos ever knew was staged. Karen sat back in her chair. He lost her, she whispered to herself, and he never got to say goodbye. But that still didn't explain the puppies. Until Lila, flipping through surveillance photos from last week, noticed something. "Dr. Holt, come look." One of the images showed Amos curled tightly beside a particular puppy, a golden-furred mutt with floppy ears and a distinct whimper. Amos had wrapped both paws carefully around its crate, face pressed against it. It was identical to another image Karen had seen in the circus record file, a publicity shot of the same posture, except back then it was the black-coated female bear. The resemblance was painful. "Maybe it's not instinct," Lila murmured. "Maybe it's grief." Karen's voice cracked. "He's reliving it. Every time he hears them cry, he hears her." The realization hit everyone at once. Amos wasn't just soothing the puppies. He was healing an old, invisible wound. He had known the sound of suffering, the pain of confinement, the emptiness of loss. And somehow, by comforting the smallest, most fragile lives at the shelter, he was comforting the memory of what he had lost. The next night, no one stopped him when he entered the room again. But this time, instead of just observing, Karen followed with a blanket in her hand. She placed it beside Amos and sat quietly on the floor as the puppies whimpered and crawled near him. He gave a soft grunt, then laid his massive paw beside him again, slow, careful, loving. And as Karen blinked back tears, one single truth echoed louder than any test result. This bear wasn't broken. He was grieving, and he was healing. The story of the bear who hugged crying puppies began to ripple beyond the shelter walls. What started as internal concern had turned into fascination, not just from vets, but from behaviorists, therapists, and even journalists. Yet, inside the Oak Ridge Rescue Center, nothing had changed for Amos. Each night, he rose slowly, walked through the hallway, and entered the room with the newborns. And each time his presence became more than a comfort. It became ritual. Karen had quietly converted a spare office near the puppy room into what staff lovingly called the healing room. It was fitted with soft lighting, thick blankets, and a safety gate that separated Amos from the youngest dogs while still letting him reach out and lie beside them. A large floor cushion was placed where he always chose to rest, directly in front of crates. One night, a volunteer named Marcus brought in a new litter of rescue puppies, abandoned, malnourished, terrified. They trembled at the slightest noise, whimpered without reason, flinched at hands. Their tiny bodies shook from stress-induced tremors. Karen had seen trauma in animals before, but this was deep. And yet, when Amos entered the room later that evening, everything changed. He lay down like always. No growling, no show of dominance. Just stillness. The moment when the puppies whimpered, Amos exhaled, leaned closer, and extended a paw through the gate's lower opening. His claws retracted as far back as they could go, a gesture no one had ever taught him. He curled the paw inward, letting it brush against the crate, not to grab, but to feel. One puppy crawled forward, a black and white runt with trembling legs. It pressed its nose to the bear's fur, and then, for the first time since it arrived, it stopped crying. Marcus, watching from a distance, covered his mouth with both hands. Karen, standing next to him, whispered, "He's teaching them trust by showing them his own." That night, all 6 puppies slept through till morning. No whimpers, no scratching, just quiet breathing, curled against the mesh wall where Amos had been. Soon, the shelter began to refer to him not as the bear, but the guardian. He wasn't just reacting to sadness anymore. He was anticipating it. If a new puppy arrived, Amos would quietly pace his enclosure until someone led him near. If a pup had surgery, he waited near the medical door, watching. His instincts were no longer just rooted in grief. They were evolving into purpose. The staff noticed something else too. Amos began to show signs of emotional recovery. He slept more peacefully. He started eating with enthusiasm again. He even let volunteers brush his fur, something he once resisted with low grunts. The healing, it turned out, was not one-sided. As Amos helped the puppies overcome fear, he was releasing something inside himself, something buried beneath years of chains, cages, and staged affection. And with every soft embrace, he was finally learning what real love felt like. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when everything changed. Karen had been hesitant about media coverage. The story of a bear hugging crying puppies was tender. Too tender, she feared, to survive the harsh glare of internet spectacle. But it was volunteer Lila who convinced her, if we show the world what he does, maybe others will finally understand animals like Amos, what they feel, what they remember. Karen nodded, reluctantly. They set up a small camera in the healing room, one that would stream for only an hour during the night. No music, no editing, just Amos, just the truth. The next morning, the shelter's inbox was flooded. The clip of a 700-pound brown bear gently pulling a crate of crying puppies toward him had gone viral. The internet didn't laugh. It cried. It shared. It responded with awe and gratitude. Comments poured in by the thousands. I've never cried this hard over an animal video. He's not just hugging them, he's healing them. This bear understands more about love than most humans. News agencies picked it up. Within days, major outlets had contacted the shelter. They asked for interviews, donations, live coverage. But through it all, Karen made one thing clear. No flash, no exploitation. If we're going to tell a story, we do it on his terms, with dignity. Soon, Amos became a symbol, not a captivity, not of brokenness, but of recovery. People from all over the world donated to Oak Ridge, funding new enclosures, medical care, and therapy resources for other emotionally traumatized animals. And then came the moment that changed everything. A retired trauma therapist from Colorado, who had spent years working with war veterans and PTSD survivors, reached out with a proposition. He had seen the footage, studied Amos's behavior, and offered this insight. He's not just mourning, he's mirroring. He explained that Amos may have been responding to the puppy's cries not only out of memory, but because they echoed his own unhealed emotional state. In comforting them, he was calming himself. Karen took the theory to heart. Inspired by it, she began allowing older rescue dogs, the ones who had lived through abuse, abandonment, and worse, to visit the healing room under supervision. She watched with wide eyes as even the most anxious dog slowly approached Amos, sniffed him cautiously, and laid down beside him. It wasn't just the puppies anymore. He was now comforting survivors. One night, a senior husky named River, known for refusing contact and cowering at every sound, approached Amos as he rested. With trembling steps, River leaned against the bear's side. Amos didn't move. He just blinked slowly, then nudged his massive head against the dog's shoulder. And that night, for the first time in 3 years, River slept through the night without medication. The headlines had said it was a miracle. But inside Oak Ridge, everyone knew the truth. This was no miracle. It was empathy. Pure, primal, unfiltered empathy from a heart that had been broken and rebuilt through love. Months passed, and yet Amos never missed a single night. Every evening, just as the sun dipped behind the trees, he made his slow, heavy walk to the healing room. He no longer waited for permission. He no longer needed help with gates or nudges of encouragement. He knew his way. The shelter had adapted, not just in schedule or space, but in philosophy, because Amos hadn't just changed routines. He had changed hearts. Veterinarians who once approached trauma with textbooks began sitting in silence by Amos's side, learning through observation. Volunteers who were once nervous around him now rested their heads on his shoulder as puppies slept between his legs. Visitors came not to stare at a spectacle, but to witness a lesson, one given without words. Amos didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was the message. One spring afternoon, something remarkable happened. A child named Max, diagnosed with selective mutism and PTSD after surviving a house fire, visited the shelter with his foster family. He hadn't spoken in months. He flinched at dogs, avoided people, and never made eye contact. Karen was cautious but hopeful. She allowed Max into the healing room during a calm hour. Amos was already inside, lying in his favorite spot. The moment Max entered, the bear looked up. Their eyes met. Max froze, but Amos didn't move toward him. He just blinked, slow, steady, and then shifted slightly to make room on the floor cushion beside him. Max walked forward. Saturday. Said nothing. For 10 minutes, silence. Then 15. Then Max leaned into the bear's side, small fingers digging into thick fur. The room held its breath. And then came the whisper, barely audible, cracked from disuse. Warm. Karen, standing outside the glass, gasped. Tears filled her eyes. That single word unraveled months of silence. From that day forward, the healing room wasn't just for animals. It became a registered animal-assisted therapy wing, the first of its kind led by a bear. Children, veterans, abuse survivors, and abandoned animals alike came through those doors not for treatment, but for Amos, and he welcomed them all. Years later, Amos's age began to show. His steps slowed, his coat grayed. But every night, he still came to the puppies, still curled up beside those in pain, still offered what no drug, no human, no therapy could replicate: peace. When he finally passed, it was in that same room, head resting near a crate of newborns, a paw gently extended through the bars. The town held a memorial. People came from across the country. Artists painted murals. Children released paper lanterns. And someone carved a statue of him at the shelter entrance. Amos, the bear who healed with his heart. And even today, when a new pup cries in quiet hours of night, staff swear they feel something: a warmth, a presence, a calm. Because some love is too big to disappear. And Amos never really left.